Good afternoon, folks. This is your friend John Rust, chicken farmer from Seymour, Indiana, right here on Freedom 95, broadcasting all across the state of Indiana. Thrilled to be with you today. I'm here in the studio with Aid Marietta and Justin George. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always good to be here.
Same.
So, big news this week, as we unfortunately we expected. The Indiana General Assembly just passed a massive government spending increase yet again. No decrease, it's an increase. The state budget went up to over $54 billion from just $51.3 billion last year. It includes new taxes, especially on cigarettes, $2 a pack for a cigarette tax. It's going to make up $800 million in revenue that they're talking about there being a shortfall in revenue. It's not a shortfall in revenue, folks. The amount of revenue is increasing every year. For the next 3 years, it's increasing every single year. There's not one year it will decrease. Legislative leaders, President pro tempore of the Indiana State Senate, and Todd Houston, the Speaker of the House, passed this last night at, 1:38 a.m.?
It was very late.
Very late indeed.
And there were some legislators on the floor talking about how they were so upset there were bills being presented to them they had to vote on that they did not have the time to read. Everything was rammed through at the last minute.
Sounds like Congress.
Yep.
The legislators didn't even have time to read what they were voting on. It was all backroom deals, backroom politics.
And this is what happens when they stay up late. They do it at the dead of night when most everyone else is asleep.
Well, and I want to go in specifically on revenue. This is the total general fund revenue forecast for fiscal years 2025, 2026, and 2027. For 2025, the updated forecast is for $22 billion with the B dollars of revenue. That's not a decrease from last year, that's an increase. For 2026, the estimate is $22.28 billion. That's an increase of over $200 million. And for 2027, there's another $30 million increase over what it would be for 2026. So there's an increase in revenue coming in, and they're saying, oh, it's a decrease. There's a shortfall. No, there's not a shortfall. The only shortfall is the rate of increase is not as much as what they were forecasting, but it's still an increase. And it's like this property tax bill that just passed, the week before, that's an actual increase. They're saying you get $300 back for a rebate, but your net taxes are going up $500. It's false. And one of the ways that they're talking about raising future revenue to pay for all this massive spending that they keep pushing through is, the Indianapolis Star published this, they are pushing through a bill, and it's in the headline from the Indianapolis Star is Indiana lawmakers clear the path for new toll roads. They want to make 465, I-65, I-70, I-69, and I-74 toll roads, or at least give the authority to Governor Braun to make those toll roads at the flick of a switch. It will not even require any further legislative approval. It's done. All we have to wait for is Washington, D.C. to approve some technical stuff, and they will do this. So watch out, folks. Toll roads are coming, and we are going to do everything we can to stop that. One of the reasons I got into politics is I can't stand toll roads and toll bridges. You are tolling working people that have to go to work every day, and that's the same on 465. There are already toll roads in northern Indiana leased to a private company in 2006, so I guess they're going to be selling 465, I-65, I-70, and 74 to whoever just to make up their revenue that they have to keep spending and spending and spending without cutting. We need to get government back to pre-COVID levels, in my opinion. And then you take a look.
Absolutely.
And then you look at it to see what's really necessary. But as a baseline, you go back to pre-COVID, before all this massive government spending, which was for a problem that it turns out the spending didn't really do anything for.
And they're telling us, too, that they're working for us, and yet the so-called work is actually making it harder when our fellow Hoosiers go to commute to work, and when they're trying to live the American dream, the lawmakers in the state, when they do this stuff, they're not working for our fellow Hoosiers. They're working for their special interests, and now we see it with the toll stuff, and it's going to add to all of the many traffic problems that are going on around
And not to mention,
Indianapolis.
I think most people would prefer taking the interstate rather than going on the pothole inflicted, the massive amount of potholes that exists on the main roads in the streets of downtown Indianapolis. I have to, whether I've had to commute there before, and I've got to
Same
tell you,
here.
I'm always very careful of those potholes. I don't remember.
Well, now you're going to have to pay to use those potholes.
Oh, I hope not.
Pay for the opportunity to get a realignment.
Yes. Welcome to Indiana, folks. Current law, and this was just changed, says that the Indiana Department of Transportation cannot toll within 75 miles of an existing toll road. That just removed that restriction, what was just passed. What a scam to just continually increase government spending. And what happened they made I-90 a toll road up north. Everyone just switched to I-94. I don't know if you're familiar in northern Indiana, there's two interstates that go across the top of the state. And one of them's toll road. And so everyone just, we're going to take the other one. But it's it's just an extra fee on Hoosier taxpayers. We're in a period of financial stress. People travel these roads to get to and go to work. And you're going to have to pay $6 to $7 now every time you go one way on these roads.
It all adds up.
It's what career politicians do. They raise your taxes, they raise government spending, and now in Indiana they are just to make it to all Hoosiers where you have to pay a toll every day just to drive on the roads you've already paid for with your tax dollars.
If they think that's the best way to raise rent,
no. Well, but our alternative is the Democratic Party. What they would do, they would just turn 465 into a bike lane.
No cars allowed.
no cars, more
No
bike
cars
lanes.
allowed.
We have roads that are more important right now. Nobody uses the bike lanes in Indianapolis. I would know that. I see it. They're never in use.
Exactly.
I hardly know anybody I hardly see anybody on a bike in Indianapolis. I'm not saying you can't use a
the city
bike.
of Indianapolis spent $300 million on bike lanes last year and only $200 million repaving their roads. That's why we have the road conditions we have in the state of Indiana.
Exactly.
And it gets back to Indiana having the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. We are raking in the revenue from having one of the highest gasoline taxes in the country. Only California, Illinois, and the state of Pennsylvania is higher than us. Those are all heavily liberal, Democratic-ran states.
All three with Democrat governors.
And
Exactly.
we're number 4 right behind them. And in New Jersey, that's not known as a conservative state.
Oh no! I mean, they've had Republican governors in the past, but it's hardly a red state.
They have a much lower gasoline tax than the state of Indiana. For instance, folks, today, this morning, right here in Franklin, I just checked, gas was $3.09 a gallon. Today in New Jersey, the average is $2.81 a gallon. We are paying 28 cents a gallon more in gasoline than what this is going on in New Jersey. We have to get rid of these career politicians that just keep spending and spending and keep taxing and taxing. The answer is not toll roads. The answer is actually cutting government waste and cutting government spending. Governor Braun announced that they found $1 billion in savings last week, which I applaud him for that. Outstanding. And so the government is able to balance the budget this year from the $1 billion in savings and, regrettably, $1 billion in cigarette taxes. I just don't believe government should be going into someone's house and smacking the cigarette out of their mouth and say, no, that's bad, you can't do that. Because that creates the precedent. Cigarette taxes should be what the sales tax is, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I also
cigarettes are bad, don't get me wrong.
They are bad.
But you can say that about anything. Are we going to say potato chips are bad because they lead to obesity? Are we going to have a
Potato chip tax
in Indiana?
Well,
Or a cookie
let's
tax.
not give them any ideas. But I also want to give credit. He also announced an IEDC audit, and that's a big organization that's had a lot of problems with waste, fraud, and abuse, and I applaud him for that as well.
Yep.
Definitely.
We'll get right back into this, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the show, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. We are talking about, as usual, unfortunately, what career politicians are doing to our country, not here just in Indiana, but also federally in Washington, D.C. This is from Gunther Eagleman on Twitter. Out of the first 110 days of the year, this year for 2025, the House GOP has taken 85 days off.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
That's a sweet gig.
It is. I mean, so
yeah, $200,000 a year. You only have to work, what, 25 days out of 110?
Imagine
Wow.
that deal. Imagine that deal in the private sector.
You know, he says, for the love of God, get back to work.
Exactly.
What have they done? This is like Groundhog Day. You know, every
it's
day.
perpetual. It's the same over and over. And they tell us, oh, we're going to do this. And like Representative Thomas Massey says, they kick the can down the road and for other purposes. And that's what they're doing again.
Well, what they do, what all these congressmen and senators are great at doing is they are great about tweeting about stuff.
They like to talk.
But never, ever, ever, never actually doing anything about it.
Lots of talk, not a lot of doing.
And so, just for instance, Jim Banks this week tweeted out, Hamas is currently bucking under financial strain, unable to pay its terrorists. Guess what, folks? Jim Banks and Todd Young both voted for the First Step Act, which released terrorist fundraiser Mohammed Youssef Hammoud, Hezbollah, back to the Middle East from an American prison where he was found guilty and he got released early based on this law that Jim Banks and Todd Young voted for. This is what ticks me off. I use a polite term there. They tweet about, oh, how bad these terrorists are, and then they vote for the bills that let them off the hook and let them go back to doing their...
Puts them back on the battlefield, just like when Barack Obama released 5 Taliban terrorists, put them back from Gitmo, put them back on the battlefield, and some of them now run the Afghan government.
Exactly. It's the same thing. And then
I think one of them is the supreme leader or the prime minister. I don't remember.
Exactly. And speaking of Banks, that's what he does all the time. He says one thing, but then his voting record is another, and then he goes around the state when he's rarely here, by the way. He doesn't work for our fellow Hoosiers. He's working for himself in a special interest, and then he's telling us these things. And I would just encourage people to look at the voting record from all these guys in Congress all the way down to what's going on in our state and look at what they're actually doing, not what they're saying.
Well, and they're paying for it. Like Jim Banks was talking about Hamas being under financial strain. The reason they're under strain is because USAID was cutting off their money.
Right.
That the Republican Congress paid for in 2023 and 2024. Jim Banks, Aaron Hounchin, I think Jim Banks skipped the vote. He missed 30% of the votes last time I checked.
Yeah, he skipped the what was it?
The funding bill for
he skipped that one.
He skipped the government shutdown funding bill. That was the one he missed.
And it was a big continuing resolution, and he was just nowhere to be seen. So the GOP is funding this crap by funding USAID, and then Elon Musk and President Trump find it, and then they tweet about it today, saying, "Oh yeah, that's great," even though they're the ones that paid for it. And it's the exact same thing. Jim Banks is talking about illegal border crossings are at a record low under President Trump. Promises made, promises kept. Guess who blocked the border wall in 2017 and 2018? House of Representatives. The cost of the entire border wall from the Gulf of America to the Pacific Ocean was $17 billion.
He went to the Atlantic magazine in 2017 after he put Paul Ryan in a speaker, and he said, I want an influx of immigration. He got his wish.
Well, the Republicans back then were talking about they wanted immigrants because they wanted cheap labor in the United States.
Yes.
They were not interested in the working man. Republicans are today, hopefully. He's changed his tune, but it's whatever is popular at the moment. We'll get more into that later with this. I call him Carlin, the Charlatan Yodeler. We're going to be talking about him later on. My gosh, what a sleazeball that guy is, but we'll get into that later. The other thing Jim Banks was talking about, while Harvard claims to be defending freedom of expression, here's the truth. The university received a 0-point free speech ranking on a 100-point scale. Guess who's been funding Harvard for 2023 and 2024? The Republican Congress again. They could have cut those funds off back then. They just passed, just a few, 2 months ago, they passed a CR that included funding for Harvard.
It was the one in March that they did this, and
this is all the same university that had Claudine Gay, the one woman who got basically had gotten into a lot of controversy for her remarks about the anti-Semitism on college campuses. And I would just say to him, Senator Jim Banks is saying, "Oh, we got to stop funding." Senator, how many times have you voted to fund Harvard in the House and the Senate?
Or not? I think his excuse is why I missed that vote.
But he uses that as an excuse.
But he votes for leadership that makes it happen. Oftentimes with Democratic votes, and then a lot of the quote unquote, these I call them fraud conservatives, they say, "Oh, I voted against it," and so they just use a few Democratic members' votes to pass it through what the Republican leadership that Jim Banks and Aaron Hounchin and all these frauds vote for. And we still get this massive spending. Republicans controlled the Congress in 2017 and 2018, 2023 and 2024. They could have cut the fundings. The Republican-led House of Representatives has the absolute power of the purse. The government cannot spend one penny without the House of Representatives appropriating it. That's in the Constitution. But our elected members of Congress refuse to do their job. All they want to do is dial for dollars and tweet about stuff. Why was the Republican Congress, Jim Banks, Aaron, Todd Young, why were you all funding Harvard in the first place?
Exactly.
Universities should be state funded, where local control can keep our public institutions from being weaponized against America. And that's exactly what's happening in Harvard and Yale and these left-wing schools with billions and billions of dollars of funds in reserve. I think Harvard has over $50 billion in endowment. They don't need government taxpayer money, but we have to keep writing a check, and we have to have debt added to every taxpayer. When Jim Banks and Todd Young were elected to Congress in 2017, your share as a taxpayer of the national debt was $171,000. Today it's over $323,000, and it is going up over $1 trillion every 100 days. Every bad program that you hear that Doge and President Trump has found out to cut could have been ended by the Republican Congress in 2023.
They let it go on.
The Republican Congress funded every penny of this stuff by refusing to defund it. This perpetual problem of funding NPR, National Public Radio. This has been going on for 30 years, folks. I remember this back in the Reagan days and back in the 90s. Even in the 1980s, we were talking about how bad NPR was back then, and Republicans all said, "Oh, yeah, we're going to defund it." They never, ever, never, ever, never do. Jim Banks says, NPR shouldn't be funded by taxpayer dollars, and just 2 months ago he voted for the CR that funded NPR.
So it's hard for him to say he doesn't like NPR when he's voting to fund it.
Well,
exactly
what they do is, and this is I call this fraud. They introduce these bills that will never ever be passed, and then say, "Oh, look, I'm a conservative." He has introduced, this worthless bill. It might as well be printed on toilet paper to defund NPR. Do you think that will ever really pass?
No,
Nope.
No, and I mean he knows.
And they will hide behind, "Oh, well, we don't have enough Republican votes in the Congress."
Exactly, and that's even if they show up, and that's the thing with Senator Banks and the things that he says and claims. I would just encourage people to look at what he's actually doing or not doing.
Their voting record is nothing compared to what they say when they attend a Lincoln Day dinner in Indiana. He flies in and thumps his chest, "I'm a conservative," and he goes back to Washington and votes the establishment liberal line. The GOP, they're destroying. Why on earth should we show up to vote if these people don't even do anything? James Kirkpatrick said this on Twitter. He said, "It's wild how totally irrelevant Congress is. GOP has the majority, and yet we know with total certainty that even the most milquetoast policy, something like English as the official language, is out of the question. Just pointless rent-seeking. All they want to do is talk about stuff and never do it."
And that's why you pointed out we have one of the lowest, this state has one of the lowest voter participation rates in the country.
Exactly.
It's because we get these people like Jim Banks forced on us.
Exactly.
No opposition allowed. They threw me off the ballot. I could have beat him easily. Glenn Beck says this, "Why hasn't the president taken Congress to the woodshed?"
Exactly.
They need to show up and do their job, and they refuse. Glenn Beck asks, why hasn't the POTUS pushed them to stop wasting time? They are going to be responsible for losing this whole thing. That's from Bannon's War Room. That's from Steve Bannon.
Wow.
Yeah, there is pushback coming, folks. They are just waiting for the clock They're just doing nothing. They're sitting there like bumps on the log.
Running out the clock.
And we are in this well past 100 days, and they have done zip, zilch, nada. Not one of President Trump's executive orders has been codified into federal law. Not one. Folks, when we come back, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is your friend, John Rust, the chicken farmer from Seymour, Indiana. Continuing today's show, we were just talking about the Republican Congress and Senate that is doing nothing but tweeting. And what are they tweeting about? This is from the House Republicans' official House GOP Twitter. They were tweeting about Earth Day, saying, "Happy Earth Day." Isn't that nice? Isn't that wonderful?
How sweet of them to do that. Yeah. How sweet.
We're facing massive government debt, and they're talking about climate change. Here's the deal on climate change. It is something that a lot of Republican politicians are in for under the table because there's a lot of money to be made and lost on it. It's big dollars.
Exactly.
This carbon sequestration thing, which I think is the biggest fraud in human history. And we're going to get into this. Mike Johnson voted for that. He voted yes. Our Speaker of the House voted yes for carbon sequestration, which is connected to the UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development. How can you be a conservative if you're talking about carbon being evil? Carbon is not evil. This all boils back to, remember Al Gore back in the 1990s complaining about polar bears. Back then he said polar bears would disappear from the face of the earth within the next decade. That was back in the 1990s. When he said that, there were just 7,000, I guess. Today there's over 30,000.
So they're doing just fine.
There's an abundance of polar
he's
bears
hanging out in his giant mansion in Tennessee.
But the issue is they use, the polar bears are all going away, so you have to do away with coal. You have to do away with gasoline and go back to this agrarian society where you're hanging your clothes out on a clothesline because you certainly can't use an electric dryer to try to, at least not natural gas, you're being bad for the environment. Well, I just don't think there's anything, not one single thing wrong with coal. China, for instance, is still building 2 new coal-powered power plants every week, and they've been doing that for 20 years, at least. 2 new coal-powered plants every week. And what are we doing in Indiana? We are doing everything we can to raise our energy costs in the name of climate change. Duke Energy is requesting permission to construct 2 natural gas-fired generating units to replace 2 coal-fired units currently operating at its Cayuga Station generating facility in Vermilion County. Why on earth are we doing that?
We should continue mining coal in the state. We have coal mines. There's an abundance of coal we could be using to burn, and clean coal at that.
Everything Hoosier politicians are doing is doing nothing but raising the cost. You would think with all these giant windmills and solar farms.
I call them the bird killers.
Yep.
With all the bird killers, we would have low energy costs. No, it's very expensive, and we're going to get into this in a separate episode. Well, it's based on poor science. If you really follow through the logic on global warming, humans are bad because humans breathe out 2 pounds of carbon dioxide every day. 2 pounds of carbon.
It's not a lot of carbon.
It is.
2 pounds.
Carbon dioxide, 2 pounds. And that's, if you say carbon's bad, you're saying human's bad. Steve Malloy from Junk Science on Twitter, or X as it's now called, says the National Oceanic Association has been faking U.S. temperature data since around 1990.
That's no surprise.
1/3 of the U.S. Historical Climate Network USHCN temperature data has been shown to be fake. Well, there's this other project called NEEM, N-E-E-M, the North Eemian Greenland Ice Core Drilling Project. They found by drilling through the ice that during the prior interglacial warm period, which was just 125,000 years ago, and that's a blink of an eye in climate talk, a blink of an eye, Greenland was 8 degrees Celsius warmer, and the seas were 4 to 8 meters higher than they were today, just 125,000 years ago. it's all a scam. And so I remember back in the 1970s, we were having a coming ice age, and the talk back then, we talk about carbon sequestration today. This is serious, folks. They had a serious plan to spread coal dust over the Arctic and Antarctic poles to make it warmer to attract radiant heat because they were so worried about the planet freezing. And now it's the exact opposite. 50 years later, now what the United States or what the United Kingdom government's doing, they're going to be implementing this in weeks for final approval. They're going to start blocking the sun by spraying chemicals in the clouds to block sunlight. This is from James Melville. I follow him on X. He says, "We plastered solar panels on the farmland and then spent $50 million of taxpayer money on sun dimming experiments." So you're lowering the efficiency of all these solar panels by blocking the sun.
How about we not block the sun? Sunlight is really one of the, as you have said,
Vitamin
one
D.
of the best disinfectants. And
well, guess what they're doing in the United States. This is going to blow your mind. This is the Trump administration. They're finding all this crap that the Republicans have been funding. There's these things called carbon credits, and and it is just the Green New Deal scam. The EPA for Trump says demands answers from a company putting sulfur dioxide into the air to address global warming. This is from an article by Kevin Killough, Killough, from justthenews.com. This was published on April 24th. The Environmental Protection Agency, Lee Zeldin, is demanding that a company that deliberately sends sulfur dioxide, which is a poison, into the air to combat global warming. He wants answers on what on earth they're doing. The company does this. They launch balloons into the air filled with sulfur dioxide. You wouldn't think this is believable.
So much for taking care of the environment,
sounds
right?
like they're trying to poison everyone.
But they get credits for launching these weather balloons made of a biodegradable, oh, that's wonderful, latex containing hydrogen and sulfur dioxide. According to the company, each $5 credit it sells offsets the warming impact of 1 ton of carbon dioxide for 1 year. They have sold 125,000 cooling credits since February of 2023. They have launched 147 balloons so far. That doesn't sound well. But these are weather balloons. These are big balloons that they are launching. And then, as the balloon rises, decreasing air pressure causes it to burst. They try to make the balloon burst above 66,000 feet, upon which they can issue the cooling credits. So magically, once the sulfur dioxide gets spread out in the air, they get paid off. And we're getting this poison dumped into our atmosphere. It's a colorless, pungent, and irritating gas that's heavier than air. It's a significant air pollutant and a precursor to acid rain. And we've all heard about acid rain, and now we're making it worse in the name of climate change. Now they don't want you to have your pet dog.
Keeps getting worse and worse.
Mother Jones says dogs have extensive and multifarious environmental impacts, disturbing wildlife, polluting waterways, and contributing to carbon emissions, new research has found. This is from Mother Jones. And this was put out on April 14th of 2025. So they're coming after your pet dog, folks.
You got to be kidding
because
me.
your dog breathes, so he's putting out carbon just like you are. First, they go after the coal-powered plants. Then they go after your dog. And then they're going to go after you. And if you go through this, there is no climate emergency. And I know young folks are listening to this saying, wait a second, we get taught that climate change is real and we have to change our ways. No.
And you're being lied to, kids.
You're being lied to.
Go look at the real facts.
There is an endless list of real scientists who say, no, it is not. Freeman Dyson, Nobel Prize winning physicist. Bill Kinnenmuth, he's a meteorologist and former head of the National Climate Center of Australia. Judith Curry, climatologist of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. Another Nobel Prize winner, Ian Giver. Jack Schmidt, who is a geologist. A professor of atmospheric physics, Richard Linson. The list goes on. There's another 20 names here. I could read them, but we're out of time. But it is just absolutely false. There is no climate change. Well, there is climate change. I mean, the weather changes.
Exactly. I mean, it's going to change. That's just how it goes.
Right. So when we come back, folks, we're going to get into Carlin, the charlatan Yodeler, who is wanting to run against Todd Young as a conservative in the state of Indiana. It is another fraud career politician, and this one's even worse. He's a lobbyist. You know, there's not much worse in life than a career politician, but a lobbyist is definitely worse. So, folks, when we come back, we'll get right back into Indiana state politics for a little bit. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust here in the studio with Aid Marietta and Justin George. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we were talking about this career politician lobbyist who's wanting to run against Todd Young in 4 years, who's going around to Lincoln Day dinners thumping his chest like they all do that he's so conservative. But so this guy, he's a real charlatan. Carlin, the charlatan Yodeler, authored a Indiana Senate bill praising President Barack Obama, calling him lovingly our nation's first black elected president. He congratulates him in this bill he authored. He didn't just vote for this, folks. He authored this. The exact quote is, "Congratulations to President-elect Barack Obama on his record campaign and election as the 44th President of the United States of America." This is what a conservative in Indiana is doing. They're spending their time authoring in the State House, in the Indiana Senate, bills praising President Barack Obama. Back in 2000, I think this was 2008, Barack Obama, he was brand new, and he was popular, and I guess Yodeler, this charlatan guy, I guess he was testing the wind. Maybe he was going to become a Democrat because Indiana had voted for Barack Obama, and so this was right after that, and so I think he had his finger up in the air and saying, oh, maybe I need to be changing parties, and so he's, you know, his goal was to be a lobbyist, and I'll get into this later.
And I would just point out that in 2012, the state did flip back by a comfortable margin for Mitt Romney in 2012.
You know, he was testing the waters and you know, going on Team Obama, you know, praising him in this legislation that he didn't just vote for, he authored. So it's why you just can't trust career politicians. You know, when get someone in, get them for 2 terms, and then get out and never, ever let them run again, ever, never, never. It's not ever good. It's just, it's always bad. Look at what's happening in the state of Indiana. Carlin became a lobbyist right afterwards, and it was controversial at the time. From the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, and this was published on the news-press.com, December 24th, 2016, talking specifically about Carlin, the charlatan Yodeler. The headline is, "Through the Door into the Lobby." So Carlin, the charlatan, he was a state senator for 2 terms. Then he immediately became vice president of a big lobbying firm. And so I've started to go through his voting record and what he authored and voted for. And it's all these bills praising other career politicians. You know, he's naming bridges and culverts after other state senators. Is that something laudable? Maybe.
I think we have more important things to do than to name bridges after politicians.
It's so he's buttering these people up so that he can go back after he's a lobbyist to say, oh, look, we renamed this bridge for you. I need your vote for XYZ. So this is from, again, the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, and it's published on news-press.com. And this is the exact quote. "It is illegal for anyone who serves in the Indiana legislature to become a registered lobbyist for at least a year after his or her term expires." So Carlin the charlatan got around that by not registering as a lobbyist, but just becoming vice president. So he got around that law.
What a loophole.
And so this continuing in this article, it says, that law, though, didn't stop 2 legislators from walking through the metaphorical revolving door between public service and private policy work. Folks, that's what this is all about. It's about the revolving door. He immediately went into a paid lobbying firm that lobbies these state senators for favors and preferential treatment in legislation. This is what we have to keep our politics clear of. We should not have lobbyists in our elected office. It's absolutely wrong.
It doesn't serve our fellow Hoosiers, and I just wanted to say, as a young conservative, and I'm seeing this go on in Indiana and across the country in many states and at the federal level. At the end of the day, they're self-serving themselves. They don't care about the future of young conservatives like Aiden and I, our fellow Hoosiers. They don't care about people like John that are out here trying to make a difference. They don't care.
It's about their clients. And this is back to this newspaper article. Senator Yoder's deep knowledge of public policy process will serve our clients very well. That's from the press release from the Cordon Group. So we know whose interests he was looking out for. It wasn't you or me or conservatives. It was the clients that were paying for it. Ugh. The article says, though neither senator will be registered as a lobbyist next year, clearly they'll be using their relationships and connections that they made in state government. If the legislature really wants to have a meaningful cooling off period, and that means more than a 1-year revolving door, which Yoder just completely ignored, or got around shadily, they need to have at least a 2-year, and I would say maybe 5 years.
I'd say 5 years is my preference.
Well, we shouldn't just be trading. And so this Yoder guy, he wants to go, so he did it in Indiana. Now he wants to go to the U.S. Senate. Just imagine how much money he will make as a lobbyist after he sells us out down the road in the U.S. Senate, if he ever got in there.
I'm going to say far more than probably what he's making now.
Right. Big money.
You know, at least 34 other states have a 2-year waiting period. Most of them are longer. In Indiana, it's 1 year, and this Yoder guy just totally blew it off by becoming a vice president rather than as a technical registered lobbyist. Carlin the Charlatan, he voted for a law authorizing 92, count that, 92 local income taxes all across the state of Indiana. Not just one, 92. That charlatan Yoder voted to increase government spending by 20%. And this was pre-COVID, pre-inflation. And you go back to what his donations were. Oh, my gosh. His big donations were from the Indiana Trial Lawyers Association, Green PAC, which is this mysterious environmental PAC up in Canada, apparently.
And these would normally be organizations that donate to Democrats, but they're donating to him, too.
Well, you know, he did write the law praising President Barack Obama. Folks, welcome to Indiana GOP politics. So we'll get back into this next week on the radio. This is John Russ. I want to close, again, sorry we're out of time. I want to close with our favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, have a great week, and I'll see you next week on the radio.